Welcome on the News Review segment right here on the AM show. Time now for us to dive into the papers, but before we do so, helping us bring you this segment every weekday morning, we have Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic. And this morning is no different. They're offering you, if you're a man, prostate screening for free. If you're a woman, fertility screening for free. And here's where you can locate them. In Accra, at Spintex, opposite the Shell signboard, there's Kumasi, Chronomabwe behind the Angel Educational Complex. Takrady Anaji State, Tema Community 22, Techiman, Hanswa, and Esiama and Zama. Their call lines 0244 867 068 or 0274 234 321. Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic, the end to chronic disease. But just the start of the news review, we're joined by Dr. Dogbey. He is a finance analyst or financial analyst. He joins the conversation from across the world. Doc, good morning.
Good morning, Ben. Thank you for having me again.
Thanks for joining us. And I know the time difference, it's the very wee hours of the morning where you are. But here, well, like we say, daybreak. And we're here doing what we do best. But I'll give you some time to talk about something you're passionate about. A lot has happened over the last few days, over the week that we've interacted. The LGBTQI bill has been passed. It's before Mr. President. There's been talk about $10 trillion saved by the Attorney General. And he has, in fact, clarified that it's north of that, actually about 14 trillion Ghana cedis. And he's explained why. Some people, though, don't give credence to it. And there's the SONA generally. What would you like to talk about for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes before we get into the papers?
Yeah, Ben, again, thank you for having me. The last time we discussed the State of the Nation's address and what was to come, I remember that I mentioned that we are at a point where Ghanaians may not necessarily trust the words of the president because of many instances of this promise and fail conundrum. And so with everything that I'm hearing, it seems like indeed some sections of the Ghanaian population, they took the president's words with a pinch of salt. And I think that some of my predictions of how people will react to the SONA, I think we've seen folks truly react in these ways. The section of the Ghanaian population who believe that the policies of this administration have worsened the economic woes, these people reacted with frustration as expected. And as I said the last time, the people have long moved from the speech stage, right? They are at the point where they want to see some actions in terms of implementation of sound policies that translate into reducing their economic burdens. And I think the president's address did not alleviate the frustrations of these people who desperately need their government to work on their behalf. And I also think that the president has successfully tried to absolve Dr. Bawumia of his role in the current economic crisis in the nation. That was quite unfortunate, Ben. We all know that the ultimate decision rests with the president on issues of the country, right? But no president, unless he or she is a dictator, no president takes any decision without the express counsel of his advisors, including the vice president. Also, you can't say the buck stops with me, portraying that you are taking accountability for the economic challenges we are in, and at the same time reappointing the same ministers whose policies got us into this hole in the first place. You know, I think that accountability goes with action, right, to course correct. So I'll say it again. Let's focus on pursuing policies that will reduce the economic burden in the country and provide equal economic opportunities to all citizens of the nation.
All right. And that's a crucial issue you've actually mentioned. But let's get into the papers, and we'll have more reflections on these in the coming days. Yesterday, for example, a member of parliament was also talking about the sanitary pads situation. For the life of me, you cannot understand why all these taxes. And then the local component of things, local manufacturers and everything in between. VAT, I remember in the 90s when we started in 1994 93, 94, 95, thereabouts. And you know of the demonstrations that ensued. Kumi Preko, Sieme Preko, Vieme Preko. At which time, now President Akufo-Addo was at the forefront of some of these demonstrations. Of course, VAT across the world has been used for positive ends, but in addition to everything else that Ghana has to juggle right now, it's become a bit of a monster, an albatross round our necks. And now you have private transporters saying we're going to increase transport fares and everything in between. You ask yourself, with this entire crunch on the system, how are people even surviving? How are people surviving? Businesses are complaining. They are passing on costs to consumers. Consumers are complaining. Whatever it is, whether it's food, drink, utilities. And you see, this is where it gets a bit, it's like spitting into the face of someone you've already annoyed, right? Because recently I heard Dr. Gideon Boako complaining that a certain host on another morning show, what did the person get from over criticizing them? Not me, some other host. And I found it, and you know, there were comments about, wait, but when that same person was criticizing the erstwhile administration, over criticizing them, like you say, so to speak, you were happy about that, right? It's just a mess. But for me, one of my chief peeves with leadership, or misleadership as I call it, in this country, it doesn't even have to do with the fact that all these things are happening. The fact that our leaders don't even want to own it. If there's a positive, they own it. If there's a negative, oh, oh, it was just, it's someone else, or it was some mistakes. And I don't know how you can have a conscience and do that. But anyway, the Daily Graphic newspaper, LGBTQ plus bill passage. Ghana risks losing $3.8 billion. I found this so interesting from two angles. I find it comical that people are putting figures and saying, oh, once we go down this route, we're going to lose this kind of money. I don't know what thinking goes into this. But on the other end, we must face, like I said, let's not denigrate, let's not hate, let's ensure that everybody enjoys the same rights, is protected. We're all human. And I still have my issues with the custodial sentences in the bill. But beyond that, if this is what culturally we stand for and everything, what are you talking about, $3.8 billion? Does that, I mean, would you sell, like Esau in the Bible, your birthright for bean stew? You know, that kind of mentality, I don't know. But anyway, GT Bank earmarks package for SMEs. Dr.Dogbey Council launches educational fund. President speaks on LGBTQ plus bill, says institutions will determine human rights compliance, and Special Independence Day supplement inside. On the back page, 2023 African Games. Minister explains $47.7 million operations budget. And then table tennis, Black Loopers crash out in singles. Now, let me start from there. The dream of Ghana's table tennis singles glory at the ongoing African Games came crashing yesterday as the Black Loopers were eliminated from the individual competition. With most of her teammates ousted from contention, Cynthia Kwabi stood as Ghana's only beacon of hope after winning her first round tie against Kenya's Sifa Nafula. However, she failed to scale past her second hurdle after losing in straight sets to Africa's top seed, Egyptian powerhouse Hannah Goda, in the round of 16 at the Accra International Conference Center. And I'm particularly passionate about ping pong. I used to play pretty actively at a high level way back. Sometimes I would train at the sports stadium, Accra Sports Stadium. So I am passionate about it. Unfortunately, with the likes of Nigeria, Egypt, even South Africa and the rest, they are much stronger than we are. There's also 2023 African Games. And the Minister of Youth and Sports, Mustafa Yusuf, has confirmed that the government has spent $195 million on infrastructure for the 13th African Games, Accra 2023, out of which $145 million was invested in the construction of the Bortiman Sports Center, $34 million directed towards renovating the University of Ghana Stadium, and $16 million used for the refurbishment of the Games Village at Legon. Additionally, he revealed that the operational budget estimate of $47.7 million for the event covers a spectrum of activities necessary for its successful organization and is not restricted to expenditure during the competition from March 8 to 24. But after having said all of this, I remember the Gold Coast Australia bit. I remember so many things that have happened. from what I've seen, I'll be blunt, our sports, that is one area where, that is one of the most corrupt places in Ghana. Manuesi. One of the most corrupt in Ghana, especially when it comes to male football and everything that happens in between. Your take?
And I think it's good news. If you think about it the other way, there's some good news there to have all of the stadia ready for the games. And such investments...
You should look at maintenance after it's done.
And I'll get there. If you think about the investment, right, it can have positive impacts on the economy in the long run. Of course, I believe that the construction of the stadium would have created a handful of jobs. Building a sporting stadium can provide a significant number of employment opportunities during a time when jobs are scarce.
Right.
The construction phase alone, I'm sure they created jobs for architects, engineers, and different construction workers. That's all good stuff. And material and other supplies were bought. So I believe that it stimulated some level of spending on these material supplies and services benefiting the local economy. And because the stadia, as I heard, were completed to make them ready for the African Games, I expect it to somewhat boost tourism and subsequent revenue generation. Now, the issue I see here, though, is that, as you know, building facilities like stadium requires substantial investment. And in this current economic downturn in Ghana, where public funds are expected to be limited, I would like to learn more, right? If the cost of financing said projects didn't strain the already tight budget, taking away resources from other more pressing areas of the economy. We need to think about the opportunity cost here also. The funds allocated for building a sporting stadium, all of this could be used for other pressing needs, right? Such as education to improve the school feeding program, accommodation for students in the tertiary institutions, healthcare,
right,
or social welfare programs. I'm not saying that stadiums are not necessary, but I think that in an economic downturn like what we are seeing in Ghana, prioritizing government spending on essential services and programs, that actually, I believe that it has direct benefit to the people and community, and I think that that may be a more prudent approach.
Right.
You can argue that this is a good investment, and I will not dispute that, right? But what is the return on investment here? The success of a project like this, a sporting stadium in generating revenue and attracting visitors, is not always certain. You run the risk that the expected economic benefits may not necessarily crystallize as projected.
True.
Leaving the management of the project with significant financial burden and underutilized facilities. And I also hope that there will be proper control over ongoing costs of maintenance. I think you're going there earlier on, Ben. It's not just about the initial construction phase, but also maintenance and making sure it is leveraged quite well. That will be my consideration, and that will be my concern as well.
And speaking of projects, something else that comes to mind, it should have been inaugurated on the 6th of March, or there should have been planning. You know what I'm talking about, the National Cathedral. You know, this year, it should have been up and running. Another project that Ghana has invested large sums of money in, and now you don't even know whether the project is on or not. So, but like I say, we day inside. Sometimes when you hold one administration to the sword, people feel, but when you are holding the other administration, by and large, we must hold every administration to the sword, put them to the sword, hold them. I think it was, I've forgotten which Roman leader, whether Marcus Aurelius or Caesar, but there's this quote I read a long time ago. It said he was given the staff of office, which was a sword, and he said to the person giving him the sword, if I do well, I shall wield this sword, but if I don't, use the same sword on me. It shows some respect for the office and what you're going to do, because you're there to serve, and if you fail, you must move aside, not necessarily through being slain, but it's just so frustrating. But let's get into some other stories and wrap from here. President speaks on LGBTQ plus bill, says institutions will determine human rights compliance. So President Akufo-Addo has assured the international community that Ghana will not turn her back on her enviable, long-standing record on human rights observance and attachment to the rule of law. Quoting him, he says, "I want to assure you that no such backsliding will be contemplated or occasioned. I think it will serve little purpose to go at this stage into the details of the origin of this proposed law, which is yet to reach my desk," he added. President Akufo-Addo said this in reaction to last week's bipartisan passage of the Proper Human Sexual Rights and Ghanaian Family Values Bill by Parliament on a private member's motion. He gave an assurance that, quote, "the operation of the institutions of the Ghanaian state would determine the future trajectory of the rule of law and human rights compliance in our country." Now, on the Supreme Court, the president said he had learned that a challenge had been mounted at the Supreme Court by a concerned citizen to the constitutionality of the proposed legislation. Quote, "In the circumstances, it would be as well for all of us to hold our hands and await the decision of the court before any action is taken," he added. He assured the international community that the operation of the institutions of the Ghanaian state would determine the future trajectory of the rule of law and human rights compliance in our country. And let me just add to this that if the president fails to give his assent, as has been discussed, Parliament has a way out. They can bring it back to Parliament, and if 2/3 are in support, they still go ahead and make it into law. So for a student of the law, it's interesting. We want to see how things will go. Will he sign it? Will he not sign it? If he doesn't sign it, will Parliament get 2/3? What will the Supreme Court say? Interesting times. That story in there. Let me do this other story, and then we can get a move on. So there are two stories related to the church. There's a news feature, Peaceful, Free, Fair, Transparent 2024 Election. Role of the Church is by Michael Ansa. And of course, the church and other groupings are also being called in to step up, because should anything go askew, everyone would be affected, including the church. But then on page 19, another church story. Church should partner state to address youth unemployment. John Mahama says so. And former President John Dramani Mahama has urged the church to support the state to create employment opportunities for youth. He bemoaned the increasing youth employment rates in the country and said churches could intervene by creating job opportunities to contain the rising levels of unemployment. On the international front, this is a sad story I've been following on the BBC. Gangs threaten Haiti takeover after mass jailbreak, and the government of Haiti declared a 72-hour state of emergency on Sunday after armed gangs stormed a major Port-au-Prince prison. At least 12 people were killed and about 3,700 inmates escaped in the jailbreak. Gang leaders say they want to force the resignation of Prime Minister Ariel Henry, who had traveled abroad. The groups aiming to oust him control around 80% of Port-au-Prince. Now, gang violence has plagued Haiti for years, and there's also Sudan demands full reinstatement to AU. Any quick reflections, and then we say goodbye to the Daily Graphic newspaper.
So, Ben, I think on the issue of the church partnering with the state to solve unemployment, I think this is long overdue, right? I think that unemployment has been an issue that we had to focus on for a very long time, and we haven't had a lot of leadership on that. I know some young folks very close to me who graduated with their first degrees, and some with even master's degrees, and couldn't find well-paying jobs in Ghana. So they were forced to leave Ghana to seek greener pastures elsewhere. What makes it even more saddening is the seemingly lack of urgency on the side of our leaders to resolve this, and also lack of full commitment to enact or implement cutting-edge policies that will help us as a nation to create jobs for the people and provide the citizens with a fair shot to economic freedom. And I think that youth unemployment in Ghana should be top agenda, right? It should be top agenda item for our leaders, both in the private and public sectors. So I agree with President Mahama that the private sector, in this case, the church, should partner, with the state to find a solution to unemployment, especially among the youth. So here's my thought. I think we need to start by supporting and encouraging entrepreneurship through the provision of, say, mentorship programs, even through the church, right, to mentor the youth so that they will think differently about employment opportunities and embrace the idea of becoming an employer themselves, right? And now wait for the government or other companies to employ them. The government could facilitate the provision of startup capital, work with the private sector, including the churches and other religious groups, to provide business development support. Recently, I think the big four in the country united to support SMEs in terms of funding and business development. This is how you do it, and it's very commendable. I think the government can partner with the private sector, to create an enabling business environment for small and medium-sized enterprises. And this will end up stimulating in economic growth and also create more jobs for the people. And I also think that we should focus on further diversifying the economy. That is how we reduce, if you think about it, that's how you reduce over-dependence on few sectors in the economy. We need our leaders to implement policies that will foster growth of industries such as agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism. With diversification, you can create more employment opportunities and also mitigate vulnerabilities or shocks in some sectors of the economy. As we think about this diversification, Ben, I think it's important to mention that we need to place more emphasis on the agri sector, which has tremendous job creating potential for the youth. Agriculture is key, right? It's a key sector in Ghana's economy. We need to educate the youth, especially about the importance of agriculture and the opportunities it can create for economic success for them. Then the government and the churches should prioritize supporting folks who can participate in this sector and helping them with funding and the right infrastructure to ensure success. This will not only provide jobs, but it will go a long way in guaranteeing food security in the country and also strengthen our export position. And then we need to invest in agribusiness. If you think about the value chain around all of this agriculture stuff, including helping these young farmers with processing and distribution. There are so many things we can do to solve this for the youth, right? Especially when you think about the unemployment menace in the country. We should invest in necessary skill development to align training or education with realities in the job market as well.
Thanks for those thoughts. Staying a little bit further on the international front, G7 still working on ways to tap frozen Russian assets. Yellen says so, and that has to do with U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and they're looking about $300 billion in frozen Russian sovereign assets. Russia, by and large, has suffered a barrage of sanctions, many of them just tweaking of earlier sanctions. But as has been said, it will take time. It may even take years before some of the effects of these sanctions will be felt. But now they are hoping to tap into Russian assets in this regard. Kamala Harris called for immediate truce in Gaza, and the United States Vice President has called for an immediate pause in fighting in Gaza while issuing a rare rebuke of Israel. Given the immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire for at least the next 6 weeks, which is what is currently on the table, Harris said on Sunday. But you know that Egypt, I believe it's Egypt, Qatar, or is it Qatar, and some other country, Israel is not part of it because it insists that if you're going to do this, give us a list of our hostages, those who are alive, and what is happening with them. And Hamas also says no. I believe Israel has its high-handedness and some areas where it is not bending, making itself malleable to, I don't want to use the word reason, but to pushing some things forward. But Hamas's stance also irks me because you conducted this assault, you killed people, including children. There are claims from the Israeli end that some people were raped. You took hostages and all of that. You've brought this on your people, and you still don't want to bend. For example, you see the human suffering in that area must end. But to some extent, you must understand the Israelis, and to some extent, you must also understand the Palestinians. So it's really sad, this humanitarian crisis. And for me, from where I sit, while the Israeli Defense Forces may have their own issues, while Israel itself may have its own issues, I feel Hamas is not helping anything at all. And if there were any real group to blame, I would blame them as well. I don't know what your take is on any of this, and we can move on.
And to be honest, we all just want the killing and the hardship to come to an end quickly,
It's so
so
sad.
that both Israel and the Palestinian people can start rebuilding in a healthy way, right? It's definitely a step in the right direction as the United States started airdropping humanitarian aid
Yeah.
to the people of Gaza who are suffering untold hardship that was forced upon them, as you said, by Hamas. I also read that a United Nations team found convincing evidence that the hostages in Gaza have been raped, and they continue to rape them by their captors. This is a barbaric act, as severe as the suffering that we hear in Gaza, reported by some as genocide. Then, by international laws, it is a crime to use rape as a weapon of war.
Yeah.
It is horrific practice and a grave desecration of human rights and international humanitarian law to use rape as a tactic during an armed conflict. I expect international laws to take its course in this matter, right? We have the Rome Statute of the ICC and also the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination
Yeah.
Against Women.
There are the Geneva Conventions, among others.
Yeah, all of this can be used to prosecute the perpetrators. And I hope there will be comprehensive support services for the victims when the war ends. Both sides need to play by the rules of war. It's just as simple as that. They should make good faith effort towards ending the war and rebuild. There has to be some ceasefire at some point to stop the carnage, Ben.
And that's what we all want to stop. You see, sometimes, depending on where you sit or where you stand, you may get passionate from this or that angle. Historically, we could go into it and talk about all the dynamics, but two wrongs don't make a right. In the end, we do know that if Hamas hadn't done what it had done, though, we probably wouldn't be where we are. But like you said, recently there was a food truck, aid truck, bringing in food, and people were so eager to get the food. Some of them got crushed by the vehicles. Soldiers, in the end, some felt threatened or something of the sort, and a few people got gunned down. Or some people, I shouldn't say a few, because in the end, the numbers were pretty huge. Though it was said to be a lot of those from satellite footage, a lot of those who died maybe getting run over by vehicles. That touched me, because I remember being on a ship from Monrovia, Liberia, coming back to Ghana. Okay, when the first Liberian Civil War broke out, and we had been in there for a long time. And, I remember going to this, I think it was, I don't know whether it was Kwenu back then who was in charge and all of that, going with little boy, going with my shirt to get Gary. Okay, and there were queues, elderly people were shoving me around. My mom was looking for me. I mean, when you think of those, I understand what this means. I understand what this means, and the suffering is bad. But like you also said, you have hostages, and you are raping them repeatedly. And you expect, I don't know.
It's unbelievable, Ben. Your story is also touching. But Ben, if I may, I want to respond also briefly to the story on Ukraine and Russian
assets. Right.
In assets. Ukraine needs all the help to have a fair shot at fighting Russia to protect their territorial sovereignty.
Right.
And it makes sense for the G7 to try and tap into Russia's frozen $300 billion in assets. Now that the U.S. Congress is surprisingly now prioritizing aid to Ukraine. Look, Ben, this conflict is not just a recent affair, right? It really began in 2014 when Russia started by annexing the Crimea, a subsequent pro-Russian uprising in eastern Ukraine.
Right.
The human toll is just enormous in terms of death and displacement of people. So yes, it is the right thing to do to step up, pressure on the parties involved to end that war. I understand that there are other international efforts to resolve the conflict with diplomatic negotiations and peace talks taking place. However, finding a solution that works for Russia's ambitions in the region and Ukraine's territorial defense goals, that is proving challenging so far. It is important to know that the reasons behind Russia's invasion are complex, right? I believe they include historical and geopolitical factors. Then also Ukraine's desire for closer integration with the EU and NATO. This has really angered Russia even more as Russia Russia sees NATO as an existential threat. That said, I see reasoning behind the international community, including the United States, the EU, and other countries, expressing support for Ukraine. However, until both parties can come to the negotiation table, if that is something that will ever happen, I think that it's important that nations who cherish democracy, they continue to support Ukraine as they fight this aggression to reclaim their lands and sovereignty and restore peace to the people. I listened to a world leader speak on this issue, and she said that autocracy should not be allowed to become stronger than democracy.
What do you think of that, though?
I said that because I strongly believe in that, right? The world does better if there is a democracy, if the people actually are able to vote, are able to speak out for themselves, are able to defend their own land, right? I definitely stand...
Even if it is sham voting, like we see in some parts of Africa and other parts of the world. Even if it's just a sham, it's just a show, you all know what the result will be, and it's not going to be free and fair.
Then that's not voting in the first place. That is corruption right there. That is not free and fair elections, and that doesn't even count. Where democracy works very well is where the people have the ability to speak for themselves through the ballot box, elect their leaders according to their own terms, and the leaders don't come in and expect to stay beyond their term limits, as we're seeing in Senegal and causing a lot of issues on the continent.
Okay. Well, Daily Guide newspaper, Freddie Blay protests mischievous multimedia video. That story there. Ayoko Boche gets CARICOM support. Be competent, independent CJ to judges. Anti-gay bill, Ghana to lose $3.8 billion World Bank funds. And Nana awaits Supreme Court decision to assent to bill. I've already read that bit, but let me just get to it. So, page 3. That's the story. So where does the story even start? Yeah. Ghana is likely to use $3.8 billion in World Bank financing over the next 5 to 6 years if the Human Sexual Rights and Family Values Bill, popularly known as the Anti-Gay Bill, becomes a law, the Ministry of Finance has warned. It has therefore appealed to President Akufo-Addo not to assent to the bill passed by Parliament on February 28, 2024. And some have taken on the Finance Ministry saying, where is your locus in all of this? And literally, some have said, how dare you? But on the other end, some would say, look, if there are consequences, we'll have to bear them. We'll have to deal with them. So I don't know what your take is on that. But,
yeah.
Okay, you go ahead.
But I think that the issue of gay rights, right, has been such a sensitive and complicated topic across Africa, including Ghana. And I can appreciate the argument from both sides of the aisle for and against. I have no doubt that due to the widespread outrage, especially from our international partners, that the president will not assent to the bill until all legal processes or the challenges in the courts, all of these are exhausted. Now, here's my personal conviction about gay rights, and I'm about to make the news. I'm a straight man, right? I'm a straight man married to a female wife. Some of your viewers may be wondering why I said female wife. It is because I live in a part of the world where your wife could be a male or female. So my preference is to be married to a woman, as I saw from my mom and from my dad.
Right.
Growing up, that is what I knew, right? That's what some of us got to see in Ghana before we even left. That said, I came to appreciate that all citizens, they have rights. The right to life and freedom and the pursuit of happiness. You know, as a community and business leader myself, then I will hire a gay man or a gay woman, provided that they are the best qualified for the job.
Right.
What that gay person does in the secret of their bedrooms is none of my business. On the other hand, I'm also an ordained pastor. I preach the gospel of Jesus Christ unapologetically and without fear. So when I'm making a hiring decision for any company where I'm employed, I recognize that that is not my church. Neither is that my congregation, nor my family. That is work. And I have certain principles, right, that the company, wherever I find myself working, they have principles that I can obey without giving up my own religious beliefs. So I respect their rights, just as I respect my rights as a traditional family man, who strongly believes in Ghanaian culture.
Okay, so pardon my interjection. We have about a minute and a half, but let me add this. So there are those here who would also say, that is fine. You can do whatever you want, but this whole bit about trying to rope in others and even impact our children or adopt children, that's where you cross the line. What's your take on that? Very quickly, and then we have to go.
Yeah, that's definitely a valid concern, right? For as long as their activities are not infringing on your rights, they're not forcing your kids into practicing homosexuality, I think that we should be able to cohabit, right? It doesn't mean that that is part of our culture. It should definitely, that's not the meaning of that. It simply means that we can understand different sides of the aisle. We can be tolerant. That's how I see it. It doesn't mean that I have to practice what other people do. I have my own beliefs. When I go to church, there are things that I would say that are very different from things that are out there that people believe in, that people practice. It doesn't mean I have to do that.
Anyway, mining pit kills 4 women. That's another story in the Daily Guide. Economy Times, Ghana's economy on a slippery path, cut down on expenditure. Seth Tekpe says so. He was here with us yesterday as well. And Ghana's tax system needs reform. A former minister, finance minister, is advocating that. Thank you so much, Doc, for joining the conversation today. Thank you for waking up so early in your time zone to be able to join us. And we wish you the best of the day. That is Dr. Wisdom Dogbey, and he is a financial analyst.